Hold on before you continue, because what follows is not meant to rush past your attention. It is meant to settle into it, slowly, like something finally finding its place after drifting for a long time. Someone has entered your awareness, and it does not feel random because it isn't experienced as random. There is a presence in your emotional field, whether physically close or only alive in memory, that keeps returning to you in thought, in silence, in moments when your mind is not occupied with distraction. And what makes it feel unusual is not the intensity alone, but the persistence of it. This is not the kind of connection that announces itself loudly. It does not arrive with clarity or permission. It arrives in fragments, in pauses, in the strange stillness between thoughts where something familiar lingers without explanation. You try to categorize it, to define it as coincidence, nostalgia, curiosity, or attachment. But it resists simple labels because it is not only about emotion, it is about resonance. There is someone in your life, or perhaps someone who has moved in and out of your experience, who holds an emotional imprint connected to you in a way that has not fully dissolved. Even if distance exists, even if silence exists, even if circumstances have pulled you into different directions, something in the psychological space between you has not completed its cycle. And this is where people often misunderstand what they feel. They assume that thinking about someone repeatedly means unfinished desire, but sometimes it means unfinished understanding. The mind does not only return to what it wants, it returns to what it has not fully integrated. This is why the presence feels alive even in absence, because what you are sensing is not only the person themselves, but the version of you that existed in relation to them. The emotions you became, the thoughts you carried, the expectations you held, the unspoken moments that never reached resolution. That entire internal world does not simply vanish because time has passed. It waits to be understood. And the other person, whether they show it or not, carries something similar. Not necessarily in the same form, not necessarily with the same awareness, but in echoes. Human connection does not end cleanly when it is emotionally significant. It continues in quieter ways, in memory triggers, in unexplained thoughts, in moments where something in life reminds them of a feeling they cannot easily name. But here is the part that changes everything about how you interpret this. Intensity is not the same as alignment. Someone can feel deeply connected to you and still not know how to stay consistent with you. Someone can think of you often and still not be capable of meeting you in a stable, grounded way. Emotional presence is not always matched by emotional capacity. So what you are sensing may not be a promise of reunion, nor a signal of destiny in the way people often romanticize it. Instead, it may be something more subtle and more psychologically real, a bond that has left an imprint, asking both sides to understand themselves more clearly through what was experienced. Because certain connections do not arrive to complete you, they arrive to reveal you. They show you how you love when you feel uncertain, how you attach when you feel hope, how you interpret silence, how you fill in emotional gaps with meaning so you can keep believing in continuity even when clarity is missing. And they also show you how deeply you are capable of feeling when something reaches the quieter layers of your emotional world. This is why it persists in your thoughts, not because you are meant to chase it endlessly, and not because you are meant to decode every silence into hidden meaning, but because something within you is still organizing itself around the experience. And while your mind searches for answers in the external person, the deeper process is internal. It is asking, what did this connection awaken in me that I had not fully seen before? Sometimes it is attachment patterns. Sometimes it is unmet emotional needs. Sometimes it is the realization that you are offering depth in a space that could only hold surface-level consistency. And sometimes it is the painful awareness that connection alone is not enough without shared emotional readiness. But there is another layer too, the layer where you realize that what you felt was real, even if it was incomplete. Not everything meaningful becomes permanent. Not everything intense becomes lasting. And not everything felt deeply was meant to remain unchanged. Some connections are thresholds, not destinations. They bring you to a point where you can no longer ignore your own emotional intelligence, where you can no longer confuse uncertainty with fate, where you can no longer abandon your own needs in order to maintain proximity to someone who cannot meet you fully. And in that sense, the person in your thoughts is not just a person. They are part of a psychological turning point, a mirror that reflected your capacity to feel, your capacity to hope, and your capacity to hold on even when clarity was missing. But you are not meant to stay there indefinitely. At some point, awareness becomes responsibility. Not responsibility for the other person, but responsibility for your own emotional direction. You begin to notice what drains you versus what stabilizes you, what keeps you in loops versus what brings you into clarity, what feels like emotional expansion versus emotional confusion. And slowly, something inside you begins to shift. You still remember them, yes. You may still feel them in certain quiet moments. But the meaning changes. It is no longer a signal to chase. It becomes a signal to understand. And eventually, even that soft pull begins to loosen its grip as your inner world becomes more anchored in what is real, present, and mutual. Because the truth, the one that eventually settles in without force, is this: what is meant for your emotional stability will not require emotional guessing. What is aligned with your life will not consistently destabilize your sense of clarity. And what is truly reciprocal will not leave you questioning your own perception of love. And when you finally begin to experience connections that do not demand emotional translation, you will understand why this one felt so consuming. Not because it was the strongest love you will ever have, but because it was the one that taught you where your emotional boundaries begin. And that lesson, once understood, quietly changes everything that comes after it. There's a restrained intensity to how they feel, something they've never allowed themselves to experience before. Yet this attachment exists within boundaries, not because love is absent, but because obstacles are present. That restricted quality reveals something crucial. It explains why the bond feels so magnetic. It clarifies the distance between you. It shows why neither of you can truly move beyond this. Let's explore this. Initially, understand something essential. When a relationship exists within limits, it doesn't indicate weakness. In reality, quite frequently, it signals the opposite. Connections that are off limits are rarely hollow. They don't emerge from convenience. They don't start from mindless entertainment. They don't arise from boredom or passing attraction. They develop from genuine recognition. This individual didn't choose to experience this toward you. It evolved gradually, then suddenly became all-consuming. Initially, you were simply someone they encountered. Subsequently, you became someone they valued, then someone they could be vulnerable with. And then, without fully grasping when it shifted, you transformed into the individual they cannot stop considering. What creates the restriction isn't insufficient affection. It concerns circumstance, responsibility, fear, or principles they were instilled never to breach. This reveals the initial crucial element. This person battles their own thoughts continuously because of you. They're not struggling against you, they're waging war with themselves. They begin their mornings with you occupying their awareness and rapidly remind themselves why you shouldn't. They reflect on your exchanges and subsequently become frustrated with themselves for smiling. They envision being physically near you and then suppress the thought because desiring you feels hazardous. It's not hazardous to their emotions, but threatening to the existence they've constructed. For some individuals, this indicates they're already committed to someone else. For others, there are family expectations, cultural traditions, societal judgment, or ethical principles ingrained into their core. Occasionally, one individual lacks availability in ways that complicate everything. Occasionally, the connection challenges their entire worldview, so they opt for restraint. Instead of communicating, they establish distance. Instead of pursuing, they observe from afar silently. And here's what most people overlook. Silence doesn't signify an absence of emotion. Frequently, it signifies the emotions surpass what they can process. This individual isn't emotionally composed regarding you. They're brimming with feeling in a controlled manner. They don't communicate because articulating it would open a gateway they question whether they can close. They don't act because action would demand confronting repercussions they're unprepared for. They don't move forward because proximity would compel acknowledgement of realities they've been denying even to themselves. Carl Jung articulated that what you resist multiplies. This is precisely what's transpiring. Every instance they refrain from reaching toward you, the attachment intensifies. Every instance they decide to hold back, the connection tightens. Every instance they disavow their experience, the bond remains internalized rather than dissipating. And suppressed feelings don't diminish. They amplify. This clarifies the peculiar oscillating energy you experience. It's why you perceive their presence even when separated. It's why you remember them without intention. It's why your emotional state shifts without apparent cause. You might experience their existence lingering even during stillness. You might perceive unresolved energetic tension. That's because unacknowledged emotion doesn't evaporate. It persists in waiting. Jung also stated that until you illuminate the concealed elements of your psyche, they'll dominate your existence and you'll interpret it as destiny. Currently, what binds you together exists in the realm of the unsaid, concealed, and unresolved. Because it hasn't been brought into acknowledgement, it operates underneath, generating internal disturbance. This individual maintains you in their private consciousness during moments of isolation, in the chasm between their external presentation and their solitary experience. They might project calm and authority, yet internally there's unrelenting struggle, resistance and inclination, yearning and restraint. This isn't because you lack importance, but because you signify too much. They're terrified of destroying relationships, anxious about violating their ethics, and fearful of initiating something they can't contain. That internal warfare exhausts them. It's why the relationship feels burdensome sometimes, why the intensity persists without communication, and why separation doesn't deliver peace. Jung additionally said that the meeting of two beings resembles the mixture of two substances. If there's any transformation, both are altered. You've both already shifted. Whether consciously or not, you've both been transformed by knowing each other. Something inside you has evolved by encountering them. This isn't fabrication. This isn't an error. This is a connection transcending rational analysis. This is exactly why temporal passage alone doesn't dissolve it. It's not perpetuated by patterns, it's perpetuated by significance. Jung recorded that where emotion rules, dominance becomes unnecessary. In this bond, authority isn't the objective, manipulation isn't the desire. That's why it feels perplexing. There are no calculated strategies, there's no deceiving one another. It's simply two individuals impacted by circumstances they never anticipated and don't understand how to incorporate into their regular existence. As this develops, one reality crystallizes. You're not peripheral, you're not incidental. You cannot be exchanged. You're component of a narrative that's already reshaping both of you toward expanded consciousness. As this consciousness expands, the importance of this constrained connection reveals itself progressively, methodically, with patience, until the next understanding is ready to materialize. As that awareness settles, something becomes inescapable. This bond doesn't operate like conventional infatuation. It doesn't fade with separation. It doesn't disappear through rationality. It doesn't vanish merely because it's inconvenient. Rather, it accompanies you both discreetly. You might realize that even when occupied, even when circumstances demand your concentration elsewhere, this individual resurfaces in your thoughts without your effort. It's not because you're deliberately recalling them, but because something incomplete continues tapping from underneath. The identical phenomenon happens for them. They might function for extended periods, appearing unaffected. They might appear engaged with their obligations, their responsibilities, their routines, their commitments. Yet the psyche has an inclination to return to what remains unfinished. They recollect how they experienced genuine understanding without explanation required. They remember how effortlessly conversation flowed, that sense of existing with you eternally. They remember exchanges that carried unexpected weight, and that's precisely why it intimidates them. Because once you've experienced that degree of being comprehended, you cannot unfeel it. This is where many individuals misinterpret forbidden connections. They presume the separation exists because someone cares less. Yet frequently the opposite applies. Distance isn't perpetually born from insufficient affection. Occasionally it's created by excessive feeling. This individual comprehends that if they proceed closer, they might become unable to revert to their previous identity. They sense that irreversible transformation awaits on the opposite side of truthfulness, and they're not yet prepared to disassemble the existence they've meticulously constructed, even if that existence no longer genuinely suits them. So they maintain authority instead of embracing authenticity. They prioritize their structure above their authentic feelings. They opt for acknowledged anguish above uncertain reality. Yet here's the expense of that decision. Every instance they repress their experience, it doesn't evaporate. It transforms into something different. It appears as internal agitation, lack of concentration, emotional detachment from individuals they're supposed to be engaged with. They might discover themselves reconsidering partnerships that previously felt secure. They might question what feels inadequate. They might ask why they no longer find sufficiency in solutions that previously satisfied them. They might not articulate your name, yet you become a silent measurement against their life. You embody a form of emotional realness they haven't permitted themselves to embrace. This is why the connection feels unresolved. It's not exclusively about two individuals yearning for each other. It concerns two existences positioned at the threshold of substantial change. You sense this too, even if you struggle to articulate it. You might perceive that post-meeting them, your expectations shifted quietly. What you're prepared to tolerate feels altered. What you desire feels more lucid. What you previously tolerated now feels barren. You might discover you're reluctant to embrace someone who's emotionally halfway present. You might demonstrate less forbearance with connections lacking substance. You're increasingly conscious of authentic connections' nature. That awareness didn't materialize accidentally. It originated from recognition. This is where the deeper significance begins emerging. This relationship transcends simply desiring another person. It's about awakening. Certain bonds develop to construct a shared tomorrow. Others arrive to illuminate your personal truth. This one constitutes the latter, not because it couldn't evolve into something greater, but because its initial function operates internally. You encountered this individual at a point when something inside you was prepared for transformation. And they encountered you when they were quietly examining the life they inhabited, even if they never vocalized it. That's why the magnetism feels simultaneously powerful and bewildering. You function as reflections. You reveal what they've concealed. They illuminate aspects of you awaiting recognition. This category of connection disregards conventional timing. It doesn't accelerate. It doesn't communicate clearly. It operates gradually within you, reshaping your priorities, your principles, and your comprehension. That's why even the quietness between you radiates intensity, because something continues transpiring beneath the surface. You might question why relinquishing feels impossible, why intellect cannot resolve it, why convincing yourself that nothing is permissible doesn't bring liberation. It's because the bond isn't sustained by imagination. It's sustained by an experienced truth not yet lived, and a truth once felt cannot be erased. You're not merely holding on to an individual. You're holding on to the sensation of emotional clarity that transformed you, and they're doing equivalent. This doesn't suggest you should postpone your existence. It doesn't suggest you should stall your progression. It doesn't suggest you should forfeit your present for something uncertain. It signifies you should recognize what this attachment is instructing. It's demonstrating your heart's capacity for authenticity. It's illustrating connection that nourishes rather than depletes. It's reminding you that genuine emotion transcends what's convenient or protected. What transpires next cannot be forced. It cannot be expedited through wanting. It cannot be modified by silence or by pursuing them. This occurs because this nature of bond exclusively unfolds when honesty surpasses apprehension. Until that point, it occupies a middle space. It's not gone, yet it's not entirely manifest. It persists in thought, in sensation, and in quiet instances where reality whispers instead of declares. As time advances, the friction between who they currently are and who they're evolving into persists, intensifying. The identical applies to you. Ultimately, something requires transformation because a consciousness that has awakened doesn't remain dormant perpetually. And when transformation materializes, it won't originate from merely wishing. It'll emerge from readiness. And readiness doesn't arrive theatrically. It doesn't show up with dramatic actions or unexpected revelations. It arrives quietly through feeling constrained and through gradual realization that something inside contradicts your present existence. For them, this frequently resembles a minor fracture. They begin observing that their external roles feel more burdensome. Commitments they previously accepted without hesitation now feel imprisoning. Their emotional patterns feel hollow despite everything appearing functional externally. You're not the origin of this fracture. You're the illumination that exposed what was always present. You didn't damage their existence. You revealed the fragments that were already misaligned. That's why this connection feels dangerous to them. It's not because it jeopardizes their stability, but because it threatens the fabricated existence they've constructed. Artificial lives feel comfortable. Authenticity does not. Honesty demands responsibility. It demands courage. It demands willingness to examine what you experience and decide if you possess the strength to live that truth. Numerous individuals aren't prepared for that choice when the feeling initially arrives, so they delay. They fabricate justifications. They tell themselves it's transitory. They tell themselves it's just imagination. They tell themselves it'll vanish with sufficient disregard. Yet substantial connections don't disappear through avoidance. They transform into accumulated tension. This is why you might feel oscillation between closeness and distance, instances where they seem emotionally engaged and suddenly they withdraw. Moments when you experience connection without articulating anything. That alternation isn't because they're uncertain about you. It's an internal conflict. They exist between who they inhabited and who they're becoming, and you constitute that threshold for them. Something equally critical is unfolding for you. You're cultivating clarity. You're learning to discern between powerful sensation and authentic alignment. You're understanding the difference between physical attraction and genuine compatibility. This connection didn't manifest to overwhelm your existence. It materialized to bring clarity. You might observe that you no longer desire surface-level interest the way previously. You might experience diminished inclination toward external validation. You're less prepared to reduce yourself for another's ease. That's not coincidental. That's development. This bond is instructing you how to maintain your worth without articulation. It's displaying what it resembles to be emotionally aligned, even if incompleteness persists. Once you've experienced that, you cannot pretend ignorance. This is why the connection feels extraordinary. Extraordinary doesn't indicate it's flawless. It doesn't suggest it's effortless. It doesn't guarantee positive outcomes. It signifies it matters regardless of eventual circumstances. Regardless of whether this becomes shared reality or remains incomplete, it's already contributed. It's deepened your emotional capacity, it's refined your intuition, it's clarified what genuinely matters regarding connection, and it's accomplished equivalent for them. That's why neither individual can simply erase it because it's transformed into part of who you're becoming. You might contemplate why the circumstances are unfavorable. Why did this bond surface when it couldn't be readily navigated? Yet timing rarely punishes. Frequently, it prepares. Occasionally, two individuals meet, not to unite immediately, but to experience independent transformation initially. Because absent that internal development, even powerful bonds can disintegrate beneath accumulated fear and ingrained patterns. Currently, both of you are being questioned to examine something deeper than mutual attraction. You're being prompted to confront truth. For them, the inquiry is whether they can exist genuinely even if it carries consequences. For you, the inquiry is whether you can honor yourself even when persisting feels like the exclusive option. This is why forbearance matters here, not the forbearance derived from optimism, yet the forbearance born from trusting yourself. You're not supposed to halt your life. You're not supposed to become immobilized in yearning. You're supposed to persist growing, selecting, and living. If this connection is destined to expand, it will do so when both individuals can meet without barriers. not partially, not restraining, yet wholly. And if it doesn't materialize into a shared journey, its effect will remain because it's already recalibrated your internal framework. That's not absence, that's commencement. Numerous individuals journey through existence without experiencing a connection that genuinely awakens them. They remain dormant in partnerships that feel secure yet are vacant. They prioritize ease above reality. You didn't. You discovered something authentic enough to disrupt your patterns, to surface your fears, and to insist you evolve. That alone distinguishes this bond. As circumstances progress, understanding will develop. Not through force, not exclusively by delaying, yet through authentic living. Individuals either embrace the reality they're experiencing, or they retreat into what feels manageable. Both responses supply answers, and you won't require investigation. They'll demonstrate themselves via deeds and selections and duration. Until then, have faith in what this attachment has already contributed. It's furnished you consciousness. And once you've awakened, you're fundamentally altered. As that consciousness deepens, something subtle yet enduring starts emerging. You discontinue attempting to categorize the connection. You discontinue expecting it to justify itself. Instead, you commence listening to what it's arousing internally. This is where your authority re-emerges. The most damaging element of a forbidden connection isn't desiring it. It's overlooking yourself while attempting to comprehend it. And you're no longer executing that. You're starting to perceive how anchored you feel when you select yourself, how serene you experience when you halt searching for indications, how transparent you become when you discontinue interpreting the quiet. That transformation carries more weight than you recognize. While this connection initially attracted you intensely, it's currently instructing something more profound. It's educating you how to be self-sufficient. You're learning that authentic connection doesn't demand you forgo identity. Genuine affection doesn't request you remain in disorientation. Strong feelings don't require suffering to validate their legitimacy. That lesson proves essential regardless of what happens with this individual. On their end, the pressure persists, accumulating. While you're processing this deliberately, they remain internally struggling. They perceive the divergence increasingly plainly between who they project and who they become when they consider you. They comprehend the separation between the persona who adheres to obligations and the existence that emerges through authenticity. That contrast cannot be perpetually disregarded. Individuals can circumvent numerous things. They can circumvent articulation. They can circumvent deciding. They can circumvent confrontation. Yet they cannot perpetually circumvent themselves. Eventually, something fractures. Not spectacularly, yet profoundly. They commence considering matters they previously sidestepped. They question their restlessness. They question their emotional remoteness from the life they selected. They question what feels unsettled, and regardless of whether they mention your existence, your imprint is inside those queries. This is where numerous forbidden connections either transform or conclude, because consciousness necessitates decision, and decision necessitates bravery. Certain individuals answer that moment. They prioritize genuineness above presentation. They prioritize authenticity above security. They prioritize development above timidity. Others retreat. They immerse themselves in their routines. They fortify the barriers they've constructed. They convince themselves that numbness matches equilibrium. Both selections communicate what's genuine via action, not discourse. This is where you must remain grounded. It's not your duty to liberate them from internal barriers. It's not your responsibility to endure someone else's uncertainty.